And I have to make the requisite late 90s .com boom comparison when you bring up, we have all this infrastructure, we'll probably use it eventually. What happened back then is that all these telecom companies built out a lot of fiber to support the brand new, kind of brand new for the public internet. And eventually it got used, but a lot of these companies kind of ended up getting bankrupted or had to sell off a bunch of their fiber. So the question is, do we get a soft infrastructure landing where spending declines some, but the major players stay solvent? Or do we get a situation where they have to sell off infrastructure really cheap and the Googles, the big players buy it up, which is what happened, right? A lot of this fiber went to Google and other companies because they were selling it off at a fire sale price. Welcome to It's About Data, episode 23. This time, Tony and I give our hot take on Oracle's massive rally. All right, Tony, welcome. There was some interesting industry news recently. In fact, I think I saw this industry news last night, and then everyone was watching to see the impact when the markets opened today, and the market impact was significant. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, this is literally hot off the presses, but Oracle just had a killer Q1.
Yeah.
Now, we need to qualify that, but basically, what's really propelled Q1 is not so much the current results, which are actually a bit below the street's estimates, but it's their pipeline, what they call required performance obligations. In other words, this is what's been contracted for. And that number, which has been pretty significant up till now, has really blown out in this quarter. It's evidently at, if I'm reading this correctly, 445 billion. And that's roughly 4x what they reported, year over year, this quarter a year ago. So that's
4 times. So that's a huge pipeline increase.
It's we'll state this in French. It's a kick-ass pipeline increase. Yeah. What's interesting is I think I don't know what proportion of that 445 is this. I'm sure it's probably include that number. I'm pretty sure. I don't know if this is announced after that number or before that number, but also today, Oracle announced a $300 billion contract with OpenAI as part of the Stargate project. Now, we knew that Oracle and OpenAI have been involved with Stargate, so we knew it was just going to be a matter of time before the actual numbers came out. So what I don't know is whether, as to what extent that 300 is part of that 445 or it comes after that. My assumption is it probably is part of it, but either way, it's pretty huge. And what's kind of interesting is that Palantir, which is a current darling of the stock market,
right,
is riding on this, which is that a lot of that, some of the capacity is Palantir as well.
Okay.
And so really what it's all about, this is about running AI workloads. It's about training and inference. At the same time, it's, the business for which Oracle has been known for, which is database and also enterprise software, well, especially database. It's not, obviously it's a much more mature business than AI infrastructure for Oracle. Oracle's been in that business just shy over 40 years.
Yeah.
So the growth, they're not going to have those types of, RPO numbers for database, but, it's their multi-cloud business, which is really the growth, which is interesting, which is that is 15x what it was a year ago. Now, admittedly, the multi-cloud business for Oracle database is pretty new. They've had a budding business with Azure that's been gradually building up over 5 years. And once they got the formula down, all of a sudden, then came Google and then came AWS. And of course, we did that episode a couple months back, with Oracle and AWS. Right. Both companies, which had been pretty bitter rivals, really went into this, they went all in on this. And the fact that they made two of their spokesmen available for us on such short notice is a reflection of their enthusiasm.
Oh, it's a huge deal. Yeah, because the context here was that Oracle for years had been charging really high prices per CPU core on AWS. And there was a lot of bitterness about that amongst customers and at AWS. But also Amazon announced with much fanfare that they had ripped out all Oracle databases in their internal use cases for Amazon.com, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. But on the other hand, what Oracle has in infrastructure, and I think there is actually is a common thread here between why the Oracle multi-cloud database has been so successful and why OCI is becoming very high in demand.
Mm.
It's the expertise on infrastructure that Oracle first gained
Right.
with Exadata, which actually came from the Sun Microsystems acquisition.
Yeah.
Which at the time it seemed like Oracle was buying this star that was fading, and in terms of the actual hardware, in terms of the operating system and that type of stuff, okay, it was kind of past due. But what it gained was expertise for designing what at the time they called engineered systems, which is
Yep.
basically software and hardware that were designed for each other. And they carried eventually, not initially, but eventually they carried that principle to the cloud. And I think that principle is the key to OCI success.
Yeah. I mean, I think the perception a couple of years ago, talking to database hardware people who knew a lot about this domain, was that Exadata, which they still call their hardware that's designed for their databases, was kind of a has-been, right? But just like you said,
Right.
they've now managed to transpose that into multi-cloud and say, hey, Exadata is actually a really great platform, and you can rent it through AWS, right?
Yeah. Well, part of the reason for that was Exadata's core design, which is that Exadata
Yes.
from the start, even though it was all self-contained,
Right.
separated compute from storage
Mm-hmm.
before the cloud folks did it.
And I think that came out of that storage virtualization, probably came out of Sun as well. I know they were really pushing those
Yes.
concepts in Sun OS for a long time. Obviously, that's completely gone, but the legacy lives on in these products.
Yeah. Here's the other thing, though, which I think is really key, which is that Oracle, like all the legacy vendors except for Microsoft, was kind of caught, um, kind of asleep at the wheel when cloud first emerged. And
Right.
initially, in the
Right.
early days, actually, Larry Ellison dismissed it.
Yeah.
He was against it before he became very much for it. And this is really actually a compliment to Ellison, because actually
Agree.
Ellison, when he basically learns the facts, he will basically change course.
Yep.
He is not someone who will stubbornly stick with something. And that also showed in the cloud rollout, because initially, Oracle, like IBM for that matter, felt that they had to react, to AWS and Azure. And so they came out with their initial cloud, their Gen 1, which was kind of like a conventional design, kind of a me too.
Right.
And Larry realized, quite early on, it's like, no, Oracle is never going to succeed in this space unless they offered some real differentiation. And the differentiation would basically tap on unique Oracle expertise that I think
Yep.
that they gained, through Exadata. Now, obviously, there are a number of innovations since that time, things like RDMA, which is remote direct memory access protocol,
Mm.
but still, it stems from that design philosophy, that design expertise that they gained when they first bought Sun. And as I said, Larry was willing to basically say, something, you know, this he was willing to pull the plug on Gen 1 and say, let's take a pause here and do this right.
Right.
And time is now vindicating them.
Right. And then on top of that, as you alluded to earlier, their core database business is strong, both software and the multi cloud aspect of it. But so much of this is GPU and Gen AI driven as well.
Right. No question about that. I mean, it really is. But again, it's, you know, I mean, the fact that that Oracle has NVIDIA infrastructure in there is not unique. Everybody's doing that, of course.
Right.
Amazon and Google are also designing their own rival hardware architectures as well.
Right.
But Oracle, because of the unique design of OCI, which is a very flat topology, could really scale out those NVIDIA, what they call superclusters. And I
Right.
forget the number, but it's in tens of thousands of I think H whatever is the latest generation of NVIDIA's. And these are the largest implementations of NVIDIA's is Oracle OCI superclusters. Is because Oracle can do that in their cloud.
Yeah. And they presumably had the space in their data centers, to be quite frank, because their original cloud business had not done very well. And so they had an opportunity to build out, and that's exactly what they've done.
Well, actually, Oracle could also, I mean, they could take advantage of a couple of things. One is also
Mm-hmm.
is learning the lessons. I mean, getting in late, in this case, they basically made lemons into lemonade, which is they could
Right.
learn from the lessons, and the mistakes of those of the big three that got in earlier that were more wedded to their
Yeah.
their architectures. and they could take a different stance. But the other thing also is that even though Oracle does claim to offer a full range of cloud services, in other words, like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, in actuality, it's going to be a subset of the number of services that say like AWS has, for
Right.
instance. But on the other hand, the fact that the nature of their business was really a more focused cloud to start off with meant that they could really go into existing data centers, existing buildings, which they don't own, unlike their rivals. They go and they own the infrastructure, but they rent the space, which makes them a lot more agile. It made sense given that Oracle is heavily capitalized, as the hyperscalers, but also the fact they're getting in late, but also that the initial demand for OCI came from, largely from Exadata customers,
Yeah.
and now to a growing extent, Fusion applications. But it was very focused on the SaaS business, and so in that sense was kind of that their flat topology really lent itself to that and lent themselves to a fast start. And from that, they can then build on that because of the fact that they, with that topology, with the fact that they could tap, RDMA. It's an advantage that their rivals really don't have because they also control that hardware.
Right. Okay, so here's another thing that happened a couple of years ago, and I may just need to do more research on this and see where Oracle's at on this right now.
Right.
But one of the big deal things that happened in 2020 is that they got a contract with Zoom, the video conferencing provider, and the reason was that they offered very discount network egress, which is a big deal in the cloud, right? AWS network egress, very expensive. And if you're a video provider, you're shipping a lot of data across the cloud, so it just gets prohibitively expensive. So I'm curious if they're still pursuing that cheap egress strategy now.
Well, I don't know about specifically the cheap egress per se, but I know in general that Oracle has very aggressively priced OCI. In other words, it's actually kind of the opposite of their reputation from on-premise, which Oracle database and Exadata were considered, premium. And the stories that we heard over the past 10 years from all the cloud databases, like, oh, we got our customers, they migrated off of expensive Oracle databases. Now, part of that was basically a factor of the way those databases were licensed. But still, in going into OCI, Oracle took just the opposite strategy. They realized it's kind of like the classic, we're Avis, we're number two, we have to try harder. In this case, as the challenger, they weren't going to be able to come into this market premium price. They had to drive a bargain. The good news is that with their architecture, they could actually deliver these services a lot more economically.
Well, and they were able to continue building up their database business by pushing for cloud migrations to Azure, to AWS, to Google, which before, when they pushed customers to migrate to Oracle Cloud, initially that did not work too well. So
exactly, but now Oracle Cloud, it's interesting because that Oracle Cloud now lives in in those hyperscalers.
Yeah.
But AI is a different story, and AI is a story of we're basically the open AIs of the world realize we need big scalable compute, and and the thing is, the OCI architecture is very well suited. Now, Google and AWS will very vociferously contest that, but still they offer a very competitive and a very performant architecture that was very attractive, and I'm sure also they offered very good, very attractive pricing, being the challenger as well. So the thing is that the story now is really this is where the story shifts from multi-cloud to OCI's own what they call regions. Now, we have to basically kind of explain something, a little bit of terminology, which is that what OCI calls a region is what AWS or Azure or Google will call an availability zone. So it's a little deceptive when you say that Oracle has, say, X number of regions, and which might sound similar.
Oh no, it sounds like it's better. This is where they got dinged a few years ago. When I say that they were considered a joke in 2019, it's because they were claiming that they had more regions, but analysts came in and said, no, these are zones, and you have fewer what we would call regions in any reasonable cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, I would love Oracle to come clean there, but I think it's too late in the game at this point. And the fact is, I think at this point, The market just really doesn't care.
Nah, and no one cares as long as it meets your requirements, right?
Yeah.
Very few companies. It's funny doing cloud migrations early on. Well, not that early, but in 2018, 1920, I would see us again and again, customers would see the cloud and get super excited about building hyper redundancy. And at some point we said, wait, this is expensive even in the cloud. What are you doing? Let's just focus on the core. And I think that's where
Exactly.
most customers are now. It's like you have one or
Yeah.
two regions you use. That's all you really care about.
Yeah. So let's just wrap this up
Yeah.
here, which is that, and I see a couple points. One point that we've not really touched on is the fact is that Oracle, it does, I mean, all the hyperscalers and
Yeah.
Oracle now can be considered number four or number five. I'm not too sure what
Right.
their number is, but um, they are spending aggressively just like the others, but they're coming from from smaller capitalization
Right.
and cash flow than the big three. And so the result is that Oracle at this point has a negative cash flow because of now because the capital spending that it must undertake to support these RPOs
Yeah.
is significant. And so there is obviously a risk. Right now, for instance, like Nvidia, it couldn't keep growing, basically exponentially every year. And so at this point, it's starting to hit a bit of a. I'm not going to short Nvidia tomorrow or anything like that. Not that
Right.
I have any stock in, but if I were
Right.
an investor, but they are basically now starting to hit the era of more modest expectations. And Oracle is just really booming into this at this point and spending very heavily into this. And so there are some risks here, obviously. In other words, like, will AI be a bubble or not? I don't think it will be. I think there are things there will be bubbles in AI. But I think ultimately there will certainly be, a need for this capacity, to come online. But it certainly is a risk for Oracle. It is kind of a bit of a riverboat gamble. But I will give them credit that essentially Safra actually is quite savvy, as well in terms of they're not buying buildings or land. So that does give them a lot of flexibility there. In other words, it's easier to break a lease than to basically like, oops, we're stuck with some building here. So it's not a total crapshoot, at all by any means. It's pretty savvy, but definitely there's definitely some risk, to this upside. On the other
Yeah.
hand, the whole story of Oracle right now is not about the present, but the potentially tremendous upside. And this is a remarkable transformation from a company that 5 years ago was considered to be kind of, even though their business has been healthy all these years, kind of had sort of the reputation of like, oh, this has been their business is going to decline as the hyperscale is, number one. They're nowhere. I mean, the big three have such a huge lead on them, and they're getting customers to migrate from Oracle database. Well, as I said, 5 years later, the hyperscale is one Oracle database, natively in their in their
Yep.
data
Yep.
centers, and the AI folks want OCI compute. So
Yeah.
what else is there to say at this point?
Yeah. And I have to make the requisite late 90s .com boom comparison when you bring up, we
Yes.
have all this infrastructure, we'll probably use it eventually. What happened back then is that all these telecom companies built out a lot of fiber to support the
Yes.
brand new, kind of brand new for the public internet. And eventually it got used, but a lot of these companies kind of ended up getting bankrupted or had to sell off a bunch of their fiber. So the
Oh
question
yeah.
is, do we get a soft infrastructure landing where spending declines some, but the major players stay solvent? Or do we get a situation where they have to sell off infrastructure really cheap and the Googles, the big players buy it, which is what happened, right? A lot of this fiber went to
Yeah.
Google and other companies because they were selling it
Right.
off at a fire sale price.
Right.
So we'll
Right.
see.
No, we'll see. Time will have to tell. As I said, at this point, we're getting well over my pay grade.
Yes. Well, I always feel a bit over my pay grade, but here we are.
Join
trying
the
to
crowd.
trying to
Sounds
advise
good.
Larry. It's yeah. Okay.
No, I don't think we should do
Okay.
that. Sounds good.
All right. Take care.
Talk to
See you
you
next
later.
time.